Alright, this is our bandsaw. Today we're going to talk about the different parts of it and how to use it safely. Up top we have our upper wheel guard, down below we have the lower wheel guard. They house the wheels. The wheels spin and they spin our blade. Our blade is actually a loop, or it's an oval right now, that connects the bottom and top wheel. When one wheel spins, spins the other. That moving saw blade is what cuts our workpiece. Now these guards are here to protect the user from the exposed bandsaw blade. So when these guys are closed, the only exposed portion of the blade is right here, and that's where we do the cutting. Next we're going to talk about this fixture right here. Its job is to stabilize the blade and also help protect us. Up here we have essentially a blade guard. Down here is our blade guide. Its job is to make sure the blade doesn't move. The blade's a pretty thin piece of steel, so it's actually really flexible. You don't want a very flexible blade when you're cutting because one, it could stray away from your layout line. Basically your cuts could not be accurate if it moved around a whole bunch. And two, if it moves around too much, it can actually hop out of those wheels that it spins on. So you really want to limit movement of your blade. And these blade guides, these guys right here actually spin. They're like wheels. They're called bearings. And whenever you apply force to the right or left, those bearings support the blade and they continue to spin. That reduces friction so it doesn't ruin your blade. Now this entire fixture can actually be moved up and down, so you can cut really tall, thick stock or really thin, small stock. The entire fixture rides on this guy right here. This is your guide post. And to secure it in place, you're going to clamp it down with the guidepost lock, which is this knob right here. Over here we have our on-off switch. This support back here is called the arm of the bandsaw. And lastly we have our table. That's the surface that you put your workpiece on. This table can actually turn, so if you want to create a bevel on a workpiece, you can do that. There's usually a bevel gauge somewhere on the bandsaw. Ours is right here. Now we're going to start cutting stuff. Usually bandsaws are used for cutting like irregular shapes or curves or circles. You can get straight cuts out of a bandsaw, but usually the better tool is like a table saw or a chop saw. We're going to make both today, straight and curved cuts. Now before you make your cut, you actually need to set your blade guide height. You want that blade guide about 1/4 inch off of the top of your workpiece, and I'll show you why. Right now the blade guide is really far away from my workpiece, and I'm going to be applying pressure and force into this blade from my workpiece. And just look at all that movement there. I can almost turn it at like a 45-degree angle. That's really bad for the blade, especially when it's moving. Chances are, one, I'm at an increased risk because all this blade is exposed, so I don't want that. Two, my cut is probably going to be inaccurate. The blade is probably going to wander along my workpiece. And then three, if you push too hard, one, you can break the blade, or two, the blade can actually come off of those wheels. That could hurt you, that could hurt the blade, could hurt the machine. So make sure you drop that blade guide 1/4 inch off the top of your workpiece. And now, whenever I push it, I'm even pushing pretty hard. There's still some movement, but it's not a whole lot of movement. So that's what we want. Now that our blade guard's set, we are just about ready to go. Make sure you don't have any loose clothing, you have eyes, ears on. If every bandsaw should have a dust collection port, and make sure you have that dust collector turned on to pull that dust out of there. That way it doesn't gunk up your wheels. Before you make your cut, think through how it's going to work. Where are you going to be holding the workpiece? Where are you going to end up after your workpiece? You want to make sure that your fingers, you're always about 2 inches away from the blade on all sides. As long as you can do that, it's going to be pretty hard to get hurt by the blade. Now because this is a small piece, I'm not going to run into any issues. If I had a long board, I'd have to worry about it hitting my arm back here, but I don't. It's just a small piece. Alright, I'm going to turn on the dust collector. Let's run this cut. Now you should be standing facing the blade and slightly off to the left. Make sure you have a path to that off button. If something goes wrong, if it's making weird noise or you need to stop the machine, you need to be able to stop the machine. And I have this off switch real close by me. It's a very convenient spot. Here we go. let that blade come to a complete stop before I do anything. Alright, blade is stopped. It's safe for me to grab my workpiece. So straight cuts are pretty easy on the bandsaw. Curved cuts are a little more tricky. The issue that you'll run into when trying to cut tight curves, especially on the bandsaw, is that, well, you just can't. Imagine this is our bandsaw blade. We can cut up to that curve, no problem, but when we try to turn the blade to cut with that curve, well, we can't, right? We can't turn that blade. Why? Because there's material right here blocking it, preventing it from turning. So what we need to do is get rid of that material. And then once we can cut up through here, then we need to get rid of all this material, and this material, and this material. So essentially what we need to do before we cut this curve is cut, they're called relief cuts. You're gonna cut straight down to the curve about every 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. It really depends on how tight your curve is. The tighter the curve, the more relief cuts you're gonna need. Now I want to cut this curve out of this wood, so I'm just going to, it doesn't have to be super scientific here. I just need to cut there, probably one right there, one right there, there. Nothing's changed since we were over here last. The blade guard is still set correctly. We're going to cut those relief cuts and then cut our curve. Beautiful. No problems with that. In general, the thinner the bandsaw blade is, the tighter curves you can cut. If I had a thicker blade like this, there's no way I'd be able to cut a curve like this unless I made tons and tons of relief cuts, and at that point it just wouldn't be efficient. These wider bandsaw blades are better for cutting straight cuts. Alright, last thing we're going to talk about. Every once in a while you'll find yourself getting way off track of your layout line like you see here. It happens to all of us. Here's what not to do. Do not, while the bandsaw is running, don't just try to pull it out, because the bandsaw blade actually has no support if it's being pulled this way. See, there's a whole lot of movement there. And if, while the blade's running, you pull it out, chances are it's going to hop out of the wheels up top, and it could damage the blade, the machine, or you. So, if or when that happens, if you get caught inside a really long cut, turn the machine off, let it come to a complete stop, and then back your blade out of there. And then you probably want to cut a relief cut and then restart your cut.